Warren Pierce, Ethan's biological father. A decade ago, he was sentenced to 20 years in a federal prison for an embezzlement scheme that siphoned millions from a corporate pension fund. Now, a few years after his release, he'd bought a small, run-down house in Havenwood to live out his days in quiet solitude. According to Adrian's research, Warren Pierce had made no attempt to contact Ethan since his release. But given Ethan's meticulous nature, he surely knew his father was out and had settled just a few towns over. Adrian saved the photo of Warren and put his phone away, turning his face to the aircraft window. The inky blackness of the night sky was beginning to yield to a faint glow on the horizon. The plane was preparing for its descent into JFK International Airport. After clearing the terminal, Adrian hailed a cab back to his hotel. His phone buzzed with a call from Richard Sterling. Adrian silenced it with a flick of his thumb. When Richard finally got through only to hear the busy signal, he erupted in frustration, dialing Ryan Cole's number again to unleash another tirade. Ryan listened with a grim expression. Once Richard had finished his rant, Ryan pocketed his phone and looked at Ethan, his displeasure unconcealed. He announced that Ethan's brilliant idea had backfired spectacularly, leaving him utterly humiliated by Adrian. The faint imprint of a hand was still visible on his cheek, and the memory of it fueled his anger. He seethed about the nerve of that woman, vowing that he wouldn't let it go. Ethan, however, felt a strange sense of relief now that he knew Adrian was truly Evelyn's son. It meant Caleb and Adrian were cousins, a fact that would surely extinguish any romantic possibility between them. And since Adrian had no connection to Leo, the mysterious person tormenting him couldn't be Adrian. Ryan waited for a response that never came and let out a sneer. He reminded Ethan that if he was still pining for Caleb, he should know that Caleb was currently living it up in Europe, suggesting it wouldn't be a surprise if he came back with some sort of disease. Ethan ignored him completely. As soon as Ryan left, he grabbed a can of disinfectant spray and furiously emptied its contents onto the area where Ryan had been sitting. He stopped only when the can was spent. He never believed Ryan's affections were genuine. It was merely the classic obsession with the unattainable, compounded by the fact that Ethan loved Caleb. That was a slight Ryan could never stomach. Since they were boys, Ryan had secretly competed with Caleb. Pathetic contest, really. Ryan was nothing but a pest, while his Caleb was perfection itself. The thought of Caleb filled Ethan's heart with a profound tenderness. He took out his phone and, using a new burner number, tried Caleb's line again. An automated voice informed him that the number was not in service. Ethan listened to the message with a familiar pang of disappointment, letting his hand fall back onto the sofa. He opened his email client. No new messages. The person threatening him had gone silent. If it wasn't Adrian, then who could it be? Could Leo have had friends or family that he didn't know about? Ethan's expression hardened. He stared at the inbox, his mood souring once more. He couldn't permit such a person to exist. Leo wasn't allowed to have friends or family closer than him. Even back then, when Leo had been close with Julian Vance, Ethan had always been the one he loved most. Could only be him. Suddenly, Ethan froze. He stared at the wall in front of him, his eyes growing wider, brighter. Julian Vance. How could he have overlooked him? If anyone in this world still remembered Leo besides himself and Mason Grant, it was Julian. Ethan immediately began to reconstruct, word for word, his last conversation with Julian. He had told Julian that Dylan Shaw's past, and the entire story of the Dawn Lighthouse orphanage had been exposed online. Julian had replied that it didn't matter. Ethan had pressed him, asking what would happen with Leo. What if that fool Dylan accidentally dragged Leo's name into it? They both knew Leo's name could not be brought up again. Julian had corrected him, stating that there was no we, and that there was no reason Leo's name shouldn't be mentioned. Then he'd buzzed his nurse to escort a patient out. Replaying the memory, Ethan grew more certain. Julian had to be the mysterious sender. Back then, when Dylan killed Leo, Julian had stood by and implicitly allowed it, yet he harbored a deep-seated hatred for all three of them. If Julian wanted revenge for Leo, simply revealing the truth of what happened would only destroy Dylan. To get all three of them at once, he would need a more insidious plan, sending anonymous emails to mislead Ethan, using him as a pawn to eliminate Dylan first, then dealing with Mason, and finally saving Ethan for last. It was a vicious, calculating scheme. With a grin set to his jaw, Ethan dialed a number. He waited patiently until Julian answered, then adopted a playful tone, suggesting they meet up tomorrow. Julian's response was curt. There was no need. The line went dead. When Ethan tried to call back, he found he'd been blocked. A sense of calm washed over Ethan. An unknown enemy was terrifying, but if it was Julian, he had nothing to fear. In the entire affair of Leo's death, he had only uttered 2 harmless sentences. He had told Dylan he couldn't make the get-together but would take him next time, explaining that a crisis had erupted at the agency with a trainee being shelved for sleeping with a fan. He'd told Mason that he hadn't spoken to Leo in a long time and suggested he ask Julian, since Leo was always hanging out with him. He had done nothing else. How could Leo's death possibly be his fault? His spirits lifted. Ethan opened his messages and sent a text to Caleb. "Caleb, come back soon. I miss you." At the same time, Julian was at a flower shop, placing an order. He requested a bouquet of sea lavender for 9 o'clock the next morning. Just as he finished, his phone rang. Ethan was already on his block list. Julian stepped outside the shop and saw the name flashing on the screen. Adrian. He answered immediately. Adrian had just checked into his hotel. He asked if Julian was free the next day. Julian paused, then explained he had something in the morning but was free in the afternoon, asking if Adrian was coming by. Adrian, stepping into the elevator, confirmed that Jessica would be there tomorrow afternoon and asked what time they would be finished, offering to pick her up for dinner. A flicker of disappointment crossed Julian's face, quickly replaced by a smile at the thought of Adrian coming to his clinic. He told him she would be there at 2 and they should be done by 6. The elevator reached Adrian's floor. As he walked out, he said he'd be there at 6:30 to get her and, if Julian didn't have a date, he'd treat him to dinner as well. After the call, he put his phone away and went to find his mother, Evelyn. He told her with a gentle smile that he would take her to visit the grave tomorrow afternoon. Adrian didn't know that Julian's morning appointment was also a visit to Olivia Hayes's grave. He was simply confirming Julian's schedule as a precaution. A fresh bouquet of sea lavender was already resting against Olivia's headstone. Evelyn was surprised, remarking that someone had already been to see her daughter. Adrian removed it and replaced it with the flowers Evelyn had brought, saying dismissively that someone must have left it at the wrong grave. Evelyn said nothing. It was true Olivia had no other family or friends, but leaving sea lavender at a gravesite was an unusual choice, making a mistake highly unlikely. A possibility occurred to Evelyn, Olivia's ex-boyfriend. She watched Adrian toss the bouquet into a nearby trash can and sighed inwardly. After paying their respects, they walked down a stone path under the shade of oak trees, the afternoon sun beating down. Evelyn, having considered it for a long time, decided to speak. She told Adrian that now that he was grown, there were things from the past he needed to know. She explained in a soft voice that when his aunt started dating his father, it was partly out of spite after breaking up with her previous boyfriend. But her decision to marry him was born of genuine love. The people who gossiped were wrong. Olivia had loved his father and she had loved him. Adrian murmured that he knew. Relieved, Evelyn changed the subject, asking if he was seeing anyone. She mentioned she was flying back to the UK the next day and encouraged him not to be shy, offering to take them out to dinner. Adrian gazed at the rolling green hills in the distance, layered against the blue sky. He said slowly that there was no one. After dropping Evelyn back at the hotel, Adrian arrived at Julian's clinic precisely at 6:30. After checking with Jessica about her preferences, they went to McDonald's. It was the dinner rush, and they barely managed to find a table for 4. Annabelle insisted on paying, and Adrian let her, smiling and promising he'd get it next time. Julian watched Adrian the entire time. After they ate, Adrian drove the mother and daughter home before taking Julian back to his clinic. Downstairs from the clinic, Adrian showed no sign of getting out of the car. Julian, having unbuckled his seatbelt, remained in the passenger seat. He looked at Adrian and made an offer to go upstairs and try a 1925 vintage single malt he had recently acquired. Julian knew little about whiskey but knew Adrian appreciated fine liquor, so he had sought out a rare bottle from a collector a few days prior. Adrian seemed tempted but shook his head, saying he would have to take a rain check as he was very busy lately. Julian asked if he had taken on another difficult case. Adrian just smiled and said something like that. Back at his hotel, Adrian went through his nightly routine. He showered and logged into his email. Still no new messages. He opened a document and, without hesitation, typed out the forged suicide note created by Ethan and the others. "I'm sorry. I really can't hold on any longer. I have to break the promises I made to you. I tried so many times to keep going, to live happily with you all, but I can't do it." The only difference was the absence of Leo's name at the bottom. Adrian saved the file. As he was about to shut down his laptop, a red dot appeared on the email icon. His eyes narrowed slightly as he moved the cursor and clicked. It was just a spam email. Rubbing his temples, Adrian closed the computer and went to the bathroom. Soon, the sound of the shower filled the room. At that same moment, a monstrous clap of thunder echoed through the dense wilderness of the Rocky Mountains. Rain dripped through the thick canopy of pine trees. Caleb and his dog, Daylight, sat at the mouth of a cave, a small fire crackling before them as they watched the torrential downpour. Both were soaked. They had only just found the shelter. Caleb had already swept the cave's interior, finding nothing related to Leo. He wasn't disappointed. Besides non-degradable plastics, nothing else would have survived the decades. He told Daylight it was time to sleep, stroking the dog's head while gazing at the relentless storm, thinking that tomorrow was the day. Based on the soil's moisture content, the water source had to be nearby. If not for this sudden storm, he would have found it by now. Daylight curled up quietly at Caleb's feet and fell asleep. Caleb leaned his head against the cold stone wall, his mind buzzing with excitement, sleep a distant thought. As he waited for the rain to stop, he pulled out the handkerchief he had coaxed from Adrian and brought it to his nose, inhaling deeply. The scent was long gone, but he could still imagine Adrian's presence in its place, a fragrance that mirrored the rain-soaked forest around him. The storm raged until nearly 5 in the morning. Caleb and Daylight geared up and set out again. The dense trees blocked out the sky, plunging the forest into a darkness that required a flashlight to navigate. There was no path, yet paths were everywhere. Caleb used the distinct formations of shelf fungi on the tree trunks as markers to avoid walking in circles. After the heavy rain, the mushrooms had sprung up, fresh and large. Some were blood red, others pitch black, and some had white stems and caps dotted with a dense pattern of black specks. Caleb walked in silence, thinking of Leo, who had been out here with no equipment or supplies, forced to subsist on these potentially poisonous fungi. The hands on his watch ticked audibly in the dead quiet of the forest. After walking for some time, Caleb heard the sound of rushing water ahead. He squinted, trying to pierce the suffocating darkness, when a flicker of orange light appeared in the distance. He switched off his flashlight and quickened his pace toward the light source. Daylight bolted ahead, vanishing from sight. Moments later, the dog's excited barks echoed back. Caleb's vision grew brighter, and then, almost instantly, as if stepping from one world into another, he emerged from the darkness into a sun-drenched clearing. Before him, a solitary, magnificent scarlet maple stood in a blaze of red leaves on the shore of a brilliant blue lake. In the distance, the sunrise painted the clouds in fiery hues, casting radiant beams of light from behind them. As far as the eye could see were towering peaks and endless forest, but the scarlet maple was the most dazzling splash of color in the entire landscape. Caleb was stunned by the breathtaking beauty. He slowly turned around. Behind him lay the same bottomless darkness. The spot where he stood was the threshold. One step back was hell, one step forward was paradise. This was Adrian's hell and paradise. Seeing Caleb hesitate, Daylight ran back from the tree and nudged his leg. Caleb remained silent for a long moment before finally kneeling to pat the dog's head. He said it was time to go home, asking Daylight if he missed Adrian too. The calendar turned to August 21st. At 6:30 in the morning, the area around the Metrodome Arena was already buzzing with activity for Ethan Pierce's 26th birthday concert. In the plaza out front, fan clubs from across the country had set up makeshift booths, selling homemade merchandise, glow sticks, and light-up signs bearing Ethan's name. The sprawling space was a sea of people, fans jostling to buy souvenirs, their faces adorned with temporary tattoos of Ethan's name and picture. At a side entrance reserved for staff and volunteers, a security guard scanned Adrian's credentials without even looking up, waving him through. Adrian, wearing a face mask and carrying several large bags of boxed lunches, walked unhurriedly into the backstage area. It was cramped and chaotic, filled with crew, volunteers, and piles of costumes and equipment. Adrian navigated the narrow corridor with the food, blending seamlessly into the bustling crowd. Meanwhile, in the high plains of Wyoming, a rugged SUV sped along a highway as the rising sun painted the horizon in spectacular shades of orange. After leaving the state, Caleb drove north all day, finally exiting the beltway around the capital as dusk settled. He dialed his assistant, Alex. Within seconds, Alex's voice came through the car's speakers. Alex confirmed Caleb's arrival and, without being asked, launched into his report. He stated that in the past 2 weeks, Mr. Hayes had only contacted him once, with a request to shut down the power to a specific high-rise building for an entire night. Alex got straight to the point, adding that the psychiatrist Caleb had asked him to investigate, Julian Vance, had his clinic and residence on the 25th and 26th floors of that same building. Alex continued with Julian's background. Male, 28 years old, skipped 3 grades in high school, graduated from a top university with a dual degree at 19, then studied psychology abroad on a full scholarship. He returned to the States at 22, spent a week in the capital, then resigned from a prestigious position to work at a public hospital in a smaller city. Julian's mother, Miranda Vance, was the principal of the university's preparatory high school, and his father, Jonathan Vance, was the university president. According to his research, the couple had a biological son before Julian, but the boy had died by suicide in middle school. Based on the timeline, Alex concluded that Julian had been adopted by them that same year. Caleb listened impassively, his eyes on the endless series of billboards lining the highway. Even the back of a city bus ahead was plastered with Ethan Pierce's beaming face. August 21st, 7:30 p.m. Ethan Pierce's 26th birthday concert at the Metrodome Arena. Be there. Caleb averted his gaze. When Alex finished, he ended the call. The dashboard clock showed it was now 7:30 p.m. At that exact moment, inside the darkened Metrodome, the stage lights flared to life. Ethan Pierce rose from a lift in the center of the stage, holding his signature emerald green, diamond-encrusted microphone, and sang the first line of the night. The entire arena erupted in a roar of passionate, ecstatic cheers. "Ethan, we love you." Backstage was a different kind of frenzy. 10 backup dancers crowded into a communal dressing room, applying makeup and changing into their performance outfits. Adrian, now carrying 2 large packs of bottled water, knocked and entered the temporary control booth. Only one technician remained inside. Seeing Adrian, he looked immensely relieved and said he had to run to the restroom, asking Adrian to watch things for a moment. The technician, suffering from severe stomach cramps, rushed out. The laxative Adrian had added to his coffee would keep him occupied for some time. Adrian carefully locked the door before sitting down. On the monitor, Ethan was a whirlwind of dazzling energy, singing and dancing. On the desk was a laptop. A photo album created by a fan club was prominently displayed on the desktop, labeled 8:50 p.m. Ethan's concert was scheduled for 2 hours, with the emotional climax planned for the final 10 minutes. Adrian pulled on a pair of disposable gloves and opened the album. It contained 50 candid photos of Ethan from the past 10 years. Adrian replaced 3 of them. A few other crew members returned, leaving the control room door slightly ajar. Adrian adjusted the simple glasses on his nose, left the backstage area, and slipped through a side door into the standing room only section near the stage. He stood with a group of security guards and volunteers, just a few meters from the stage, with the deafening screams of fans behind him. "Ethan, I love you. You're the best. Ethan." Adrian wore a mask and glasses, but the open-air venue was still hot and thick with the smell of thousands of bodies. He could feel a thin layer of sweat on his skin, his breath fogging the inside of his lenses. Through the haze, Ethan's features on stage were blurred, but the gestures he made with his hands were perfectly clear. During an interactive segment, Ethan sat casually on the stage steps, wiped the sweat from his brow, and tossed the towel into the crowd, eliciting a wave of shrieks. He took a sip of water, then held up his index finger with a playful grin. He told the audience that while he had once created a finger dance, he had also created his own sign language and challenged them to guess what he was saying now. He moved his index and middle fingers together in a series of gestures. Adrian's dark eyes were steady. All these years, he had never once forgotten Ethan's signs. The very first thing Ethan had signed to him was, "I love my brother Leo." Now Ethan was signing, "You're all a bunch of trash." The crowd shouted their guesses. "You guys are the best. I love you. Thank you." Ethan winked mischievously and said they were all wrong, but he wouldn't tell them the right answer. A collective groan of disappointment rippled through the arena. Ethan's lips curved into a smile, revealing perfect white teeth. He told them not to be sad, because he was going to let them in on a secret. On the massive screens, he tapped his diamond microphone. He revealed that the reason he loved the color green was because of someone he liked more than anyone else, and that person's favorite color was green. The stadium exploded with screams. A few fans were howling, asking if it was Caleb. Ethan heard them and laughed with genuine delight. He clarified that it wasn't Caleb, but someone else. An image of Leo's face flashed in his mind. No matter how much time passed, he could never forget that face, not even the placement of a single strand of his hair. Leo loved to wear white shirts, but his favorite color was green. Green is the color of trees, Leo had once told him. I love trees in every season. Ethan caressed the microphone, his smile radiant. He added another detail that his favorite thing in the world was trees, and told his fans not to send him flowers anymore, but to send him leaves from all 4 seasons. Adrian watched impassively. Someone next to him poked his arm. He turned to see a short male volunteer, his face a mess of tears and snot, asking if he had a tissue, sobbing that Ethan was just too adorable. Adrian ignored him and looked at his watch. 1 hour left. The concert, light on songs and heavy on interaction, moved quickly. At 8:45, Ethan's assistant wheeled out a massive 6-tiered fondant cake. Each layer represented one of his albums. The signature look from each album was recreated in a cartoonish fondant version of Ethan, standing among a crowd of fondant stick figures representing his fans. This sent the crowd into another frenzy of emotional cheers. Happy birthday, Ethan. Adrian checked his watch again. 3 minutes. On stage, Ethan made a symbolic cut of the cake and took a bite. As he did, the 3 massive LED screens simultaneously switched to the photo album, and the melody of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star filled the stadium through the $1 Million sound system. Ethan's fans knew it was his favorite song. The first photo was of a 16-year-old Ethan, his face innocent and young, standing shyly in the corner of a stage, caught in a candid moment sticking his tongue out. The next showed him at an airport for the first time, surrounded by fans, his face flushed with surprise and bewilderment. The volunteer next to Adrian was screaming his head off, and nearly everyone was holding up a phone or camera to capture the heartwarming moment. Adrian also took out his phone, aiming the lens at Ethan. Ethan himself seemed moved, his eyes red-rimmed as he watched the screen. Then, a blurry photo of a man's back appeared. Black t-shirt, blue jeans, a baseball cap, walking into an apartment building. On the screen, Ethan's smile froze. His pupils dilated. The custom-made, $1 Million diamond microphone slipped from his grasp. The thud of it hitting the stage was lost in the swell of the song's chorus, yet it seemed to reverberate through every corner of the arena. Adrian pressed the shutter, capturing every flicker of emotion on Ethan's face. Quickly, the screen switched to another photo of a man's back, this time holding a chessboard under his arm, hurrying down a cobblestone alley in a picturesque coastal town. A murmur started to spread through the crowd. People were whispering, asking who it was, noting that it wasn't Ethan. Ethan's smile vanished completely. He clenched his fists, the blood draining from his face. He had forgotten about the lavalier mic clipped to his collar. He twisted his features into a snarl and screamed at his assistant, "Turn it off." His roar echoed through the arena, silencing all 50,000 people in an instant. The young assistant, terrified, scrambled backstage. Ethan was still staring at the screens when another image appeared. White paper, black typewritten text. "I'm sorry. I really can't hold on any longer. I have to break the promises I made to you." Suddenly, the 3 LED screens went black, plunging the stage into darkness, leaving only the sea of green glow sticks flickering in the stands. Under the cover of the blackout, Ethan's manager rushed onto the stage and pulled him away. The reporters in attendance erupted, snapping photos furiously and making frantic calls, telling their oars that something had gone terribly wrong at Ethan Pierce's birthday concert and to get the story out immediately to grab the headline. The venue descended into chaos. Only Adrian remained calm. He carefully selected the best of the photos he had just taken and sent 3 of them to Ethan's email address with a simple message. Your expression was priceless. Backstage, Ethan was pale and drenched in a cold sweat. His manager, assuming he was in shock, tried to soothe him, saying it was probably just a mistake with the photos. No one but Ethan understood the significance of those 3 images. His teeth chattered uncontrollably, and he couldn't hear a word anyone was saying. Why was there a photo of him going to see Dylan? Warren Pierce. How could anyone know about him? And Leo, why was Leo's suicide note in his 10-year anniversary slideshow? Ethan's head was spinning. He trembled with a mixture of fear and rage. Suddenly, he remembered the anonymous emails. He shoved his way to the makeup table, which was covered in his cosmetics, and swept everything to the floor in a desperate search for his phone. Expensive products crashed and shattered, creating a mess all over the room. Everyone was stunned, having never seen Ethan so completely out of control. His manager was the first to react, ordering everyone else out of the room to prevent any strange rumors from spreading. He locked the door and rushed to Ethan's side. My phone. Ethan whirled around, his eyes bloodshot. He grabbed his manager by the collar, screaming, "Where's my phone?" The manager, bewildered, fumbled in his own pocket and produced the device. Ethan snatched it away. His hands were shaking so badly he failed to unlock it several times. He bit his lip until he tasted blood, and finally the screen opened. He immediately logged into his email. He saw a new message waiting. His heart pounded so violently it felt like it would leap from his throat. But his fingers froze. He was afraid. What if it was another photo? Beads of sweat rolled down from his soaked hair to his neck. He gritted his teeth and opened the email. Your expression was priceless. 3 photos slowly loaded. Ethan saw himself on stage just moments before, his face a mask of shock and panic. A single thought consumed him. He's here. He's at the concert. He's right here, close enough to touch. He had to find him. He had to catch him. Clutching the phone, Ethan stumbled over the debris of his makeup and yanked open the door, running back towards the main arena. His manager, feeling years drained from his life, burst out of the dressing room and yelled at the stunned crew members, telling them not to just stand there but to go get Ethan back before the reporters saw him. But the staff couldn't get to him. The moment Ethan reappeared in the arena, he was swarmed by his fans. He pushed through the crowd, his eyes scanning every face with a mixture of fury and terror. Who is it? Who are you? Come out. Get the hell out. The fans were still inside the arena, so the area outside was surprisingly quiet. A few vendors selling merchandise were packing up their stalls. Adrian walked out the main entrance, went to a public restroom, and changed out of the volunteer t-shirt. When he emerged, he was wearing a clean white button-down. He walked down the street toward the subway station, passing a convenience store. He paused, then turned and went inside. The candy aisle was stocked with all sorts of sweets. Adrian scanned the shelves for a moment before finding a bag of mints. He picked them up, but as he turned to leave, he glanced back at a bag of gummy candies in a clear wrapper. You don't have any gummy candies? The really chewy, soft kind? Caleb had asked once. At the checkout counter, Adrian placed a bag of hard mints and a bag of gummy candies on the counter and paid. He walked out of the store with a small paper bag and continued toward the subway. He took a step, then stopped in his tracks. Slightly startled, he looked back, and his gaze met a pair of deep, dark, almond-shaped eyes that were watching him quietly. Adrian was completely surprised to see Caleb, whom he hadn't seen in 2 weeks, at Ethan's birthday concert. His long lashes fluttered. You, He managed only a single word before Caleb strode forward and pulled him into a hug. It was a tight, unyielding embrace that left no space between them. Adrian's words were caught in his throat. Caleb's arms were incredibly strong, pressing him firmly into his chest. Through the thin layers of their clothes, he could feel the powerful, rapid beat of Caleb's heart against his own. Adrian was momentarily stunned, but then he remembered. August 21st, the anniversary of Caleb's parents' death. Caleb must have only been 14 when the car crash happened. Adrian had seen the accident report. 2 logging trucks had collided and burst into flames on a deserted mountain road in the middle of the night. The fire had lit up the darkness, turning the sky red. The smell, like burning meat, had hung in the still air. It was the smell of death, of burning human flesh. Caleb had witnessed the scene where his parents and brother had died. Today must be a terrible day for him. Adrian's hands were trapped by Caleb's embrace. He gently raised his free hand and patted Caleb's back twice in a comforting gesture. Caleb buried his face in Adrian's soft, dark hair, greedily inhaling the scent of his shampoo. This Adrian was real, alive. Caleb's voice was hoarse. Thank you. Thank you for letting Adrian live. Adrian felt as though Caleb might be crying. Grief manifested in many ways, but in that moment, Caleb's sorrow was so palpable it made Adrian feel a pang of sadness himself. But he couldn't offer any real comfort. In the face of life and death, all words were powerless. Adrian stood quietly in Caleb's arms until a passing car's headlights illuminated the paper bag in his hand. He suddenly remembered the gummy candies. He asked if Caleb wanted some candy. Caleb released him. The dim streetlight overhead cast a soft glow on the pavement. Caleb's dark eyes were fixed on Adrian, not understanding. What? The orange light fell on Adrian's long, sweeping eyelashes. He took the bag of gummy candies out of the paper bag. The clear wrapper sparkled in the light. He held it out to Caleb. They're gummies, the really chewy, soft kind. Caleb had long known his self-control was fragile around Adrian, but he was only now discovering just how fragile. He looked at the colorful candies and was overcome with a desperate urge to hold Adrian again, to feel his warmth, to confirm his existence. He pulled Adrian back into another embrace, his breath warm against the skin of Adrian's neck. Adrian. A sharp police siren suddenly pierced the quiet night as an ambulance sped past, heading towards the arena. Adrian's gaze flickered. He continued, saying he was very sorry about Caleb's parents. He paused for a second before adding that whatever Caleb wanted to do tonight, he would do it with him. Caleb then understood that Adrian had misunderstood. While the loss of his parents was still painful, 10 years had passed, and he had come to terms with it. He let go and looked down at Adrian. Adrian was looking back at him, his dark, phoenix-like eyes reflecting the flashing red lights of the distant ambulance. Caleb confirmed. Anything? Adrian held up the gummy candies again. Anything. Caleb took the candies, shoved them in his pocket, and took Adrian's cool hand in his, leading him away in the opposite direction of the ambulance. Let's go. It was a weekend night, and the street festival was packed with people. Booths lined the sidewalks, selling crafts, food, and all manner of trinkets. Adrian wasn't one for festivals, and he was wondering why Caleb had brought him here when Caleb suddenly grabbed his arm and said he needed to buy something. Caleb led him to a small stall selling children's toys. Adrian watched him out of the corner of his eye. Caleb knew exactly what he was looking for. He picked up a child's anti-loss safety wrist strap and paid for it. Adrian's eyelid twitched slightly as he tried to guess Caleb's intention. Caleb took his hand, fastened one end of the strap around his wrist, and carefully buckled it. Adrian was speechless. Caleb attached the other end to his own wrist, a slight smirk playing on his lips as he explained that it was crowded and he didn't want them to get separated. Adrian remembered the last time they were at a street market, when he'd had an episode and pushed Caleb away. He hadn't realized Caleb still remembered. Adrian wasn't bothered by the potential stares of passersby, but the strap Caleb had chosen was very short. If they were more than a few steps apart, a surprisingly loud alarm would go off. Caleb smiled with satisfaction, commenting on its good quality. As people occasionally glanced their way, Adrian had no choice but to walk shoulder to shoulder with Caleb to avoid setting off the alarm. Caleb seemed genuinely interested in shopping, stopping every few feet to buy something. His hands were soon full of bags. As they passed a lantern stall surrounded by excited children, Caleb stopped again. Being tall, he reached up and took down the most elaborate lantern from the top display, a magnificent stag with glowing antlers that the children had been eyeing with envy. To the children's disappointment, he placed it in Adrian's arms. The stag lantern was over 3 feet long. Adrian instinctively held it. At 6 feet tall, the lantern still managed to block his view. He could only hear Caleb asking for the price. The vendor, thrilled to have a serious buyer, eagerly explained that the lantern was handmade with 3-dimensional painted details, stood nearly 5 feet tall, and could be powered by batteries or charged. He stated that the price was high at $300, and it was non-negotiable. The next second, the sound of a digital payment confirmed the transaction. The lantern was too awkward to carry horizontally in the crowded street. Adrian had to hold it upright, which blocked his vision, forcing him to let Caleb lead him by the hand. Thankfully, Caleb didn't buy anything else. They walked to the end of the street, and Caleb asked if he was hungry. Adrian realized he was. He had been at the arena all day and hadn't eaten the dry, greasy boxed lunch, having only had some water. The next street over was filled with food vendors. Adrian asked what he wanted to eat. Stew, Caleb replied. Adrian was a little surprised. Stew at a street festival? Caleb chuckled. At home. Adrian fell silent. He had moved out of the Sterling estate. Caleb must have heard. Why would he? I have a private house, Caleb said. No one else knows about it. Want to go? Adrian clutched the stag lantern, his lowered gaze casting small shadows beneath his eyes, hiding his expression. Tonight, you decide. Caleb's house was always empty, without even a cleaning service. The refrigerator was naturally bare, so they made a trip to the supermarket. Compared to the bustling street festival, the near-closing supermarket was so quiet they barely saw any other customers or staff. Caleb pushed the shopping cart while Adrian selected items. Besides ingredients for stew, Caleb said they needed to buy toiletries. 2 pairs of slippers, 2 electric toothbrushes, 2 razors, 2 towels, a tube of toothpaste, shampoo, body wash. The cart filled up quickly. An employee brought them an empty one and took the full one to the checkout. In the produce section, the selection was limited. Adrian asked Caleb what kind of stew he wanted. Caleb deferred to him. After a moment's thought, Adrian suggested a tomato-based one. Caleb smiled, remarking that it was a coincidence, as he'd been craving tomato stew lately. Adrian, unsure if he believed him, bypassed the prepackaged beef and processed meatballs, instead choosing 2 pounds of fresh sirloin, a pound of large shrimp, a pound of pork loin, and a piece of pork belly, along with leafy greens, lettuce, potatoes, and yams. The rest was simple: rice, various spices, and fruit. As Adrian was checking to make sure they hadn't missed anything, Caleb added a container of fresh, whole allspice berries to the cart. He explained they were for seasoning, his tone half joking, half serious, saying that ever since he had tried it with Adrian, he couldn't seem to get enough of it. At that same moment, in a private room at the city hospital, Ethan Pierce opened his eyes. All traces of illness were gone. He had fainted at the arena. It was partly a calculated move. The situation had devolved into chaos, and he couldn't think of a plausible explanation, so feigning collapse was the easiest way out. But it was also partly genuine. The rush of anger and humiliation had nearly made him black out for real. Everything in his life had always been under his control. Like the day Warren Pierce was taken away by the FBI, or the night he hid among a field of spider lilies and watched Dylan Shaw push Leo off the cliff. Everything had gone according to his plan. If Warren had been smarter, he wouldn't have left a paper trail of his crimes. If Leo hadn't associated with those worthless people who were beneath him, treating them like family, he wouldn't have been killed. They both had only themselves to blame. Even Caleb, the process didn't matter because in the end, Caleb would belong to him. But the appearance of this mysterious person had shattered everything. They were out there in the shadows, planning against him, mocking him. In the ambulance on the way to the hospital, he had a moment of clarity and dismissed the idea that the sender was Julian. Julian had implicitly agreed to the forged suicide note back then. Exposing it now would implicate him as well. He wasn't that stupid. It had to be someone else. Ethan's frustration boiled over. He ripped the 4 out of his arm, slipped on his shoes, and left the room. With the news of the concert incident, the hospital was surrounded by reporters. Ethan threw a tantrum, forcing his manager to deploy over 30 decoy cars to create a diversion so he could slip away and get back to his apartment. As the elevator ascended, Ethan grew increasingly impatient. The moment the doors opened to his floor, he burst into his apartment, not even bothering to change his shoes, and ran straight to the second floor. He threw open the door to the room where he kept his violin, opened the case, and pulled out the instrument. With a look of pure fury, he smashed it against the wall. The body of the violin cracked instantly, a piece splintering off and falling to the floor. He screamed, asking who Leo had found to conspire against him, striking the wall again and again with the violin. He had cherished the violin Leo had given him, so why would Leo betray him? Why would he team up with someone to hurt him? Ethan's hands were bleeding, cut by the strings, but he didn't stop. Even after the violin was in pieces, he stomped on the wooden fragments, trying to grind them into dust, repeatedly muttering, "Leo, I will never forgive you. I will never, ever forgive you." The house Caleb mentioned was a villa, far from the city on a hillside, a solitary structure nestled in a dense forest. The nearest neighbor was a 30-minute drive away. The villa was brightly lit in the dead of night. Adrian had suspected as much, but when the door opened and daylight bounded out excitedly, his expression softened. He knelt to hug the dog, kissing the top of its head as he always did. Caleb watched Adrian closely. Seeing that he wasn't opposed to being there, he took the groceries to the kitchen. He told Adrian he would cook and that Adrian could put the other things away. The car was parked right outside. Adrian played with daylight for a while before going back out to get the toiletries. As he lifted the plastic bags, he noticed mud caked on the car's tires. He paused. It hadn't rained in the capital for the past 2 days. Had Caleb not gone abroad after all, but to another state instead? Adrian put the thought aside and carried the bags inside. He found the bathroom and organized the toiletries. After washing his hands, he returned to the living room and took in his surroundings. The ceiling was at least 30 feet high, and the ground floor featured floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the dark, dense woods outside. The forest was also part of Caleb's property. ensuring no one would wander in by mistake. A large fireplace dominated one wall, currently filled with decorative logs. A winding staircase made of warm, aged hardwood led to the second floor. Daylight was gleefully running up and down the stairs, her claws making a soft, clicking sound. With the TV off, the large house didn't feel empty, and the rich aroma of tomato stew drifted from the kitchen. Adrian sank into an armchair and took out his phone to browse the news. Unsurprisingly, Ethan was the top story. The media had published high-resolution images of the 3 photos he had leaked. The 2 pictures of the man's back sparked intense speculation, but the unsigned suicide note caused the biggest uproar. What's going on? Can't sleep? Did Ethan Pierce try to kill himself? Don't be an idiot. The official statement says a staff member's computer got a virus and some random files got mixed in. It's probably a prank by his haters. Didn't Ethan go to the hospital? Did he overdose? Go to hell, you hater. You're the one who should overdose. The internet was a battleground between fans and critics, and the story's popularity soared. Some users were even analyzing the suicide note word by word. Adrian was scrolling through the headlines when Caleb brought the pot of stew over. He set it on the coffee table and gestured to the massive television, suggesting they eat while they watched. After setting up the meal and turning on the TV, Caleb looked around the unchanged living room with a hint of surprise, asking where Adrian had put the lantern. Adrian replied that it was in the car. The stag lantern was so large it took up the entire back seat. Caleb didn't press the issue. He sat down on the floor by the coffee table. In the steaming tomato broth, several whole allspice berries bobbed among chunks of meat and vegetables, releasing a fragrant aroma. Surrounding the pot were side dishes: a plate of pork and lettuce meatballs, a plate of thinly sliced beef, a dish of prepared shrimp, a bowl of cubed potatoes and yams, and a basket of fresh greens. Caleb ladled some of the meatballs into the pot first, as they needed to cook longer. He used a separate set of chopsticks to swish a slice of beef in the broth, and when it was cooked, he placed it on Adrian's plate, saying that the meat he sliced only needed 3 seconds. Just then, the TV news broke in with a special report. This just in: pop star Ethan Pierce collapsed at his birthday concert tonight around 9 p.m. and was rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment. He has since regained consciousness and is... Adrian looked up at the screen, where a reporter was broadcasting live from outside the hospital. He looked back down, picked up the slice of beef, and ate it, nodding. He commented that it was delicious. The meatballs were now floating on the surface of the stew. Caleb scooped one out for Adrian, saying this one was even better, his own secret recipe. They didn't change the channel, listening to the news as they finished the hearty stew. They skipped any starches, sticking to meat and vegetables, so Adrian didn't feel uncomfortably full. After dinner, he cleared the table, but Caleb took the dishes from him, heading to the kitchen. He told Adrian that the first room on the left upstairs was the guest room, and he should go rest if he was tired. Adrian was a little surprised that Caleb expected him to stay the night, especially since Caleb hadn't suggested he buy a change of clothes at the supermarket. A decade ago, he had been obsessed with cleanliness, needing fresh clothes after every shower. But his time in the wilderness and the early days as an undocumented immigrant had made survival his only priority. Personal hygiene had become a forgotten luxury. But today, he said calmly that he didn't have a change of clothes. Caleb stopped and turned back with a smile. He told him the night wasn't over yet and that he had to stay here with him. He added that the walk-in closet was next to the guest room and was filled with new clothes for him to choose from. Caleb went into the kitchen. Adrian stood in place for a moment, realizing he'd been tricked. But for once, he couldn't figure out Caleb's motive. Adrian went to the downstairs bathroom, gathered a set of bathing supplies, and headed upstairs. The first door on the left. Adrian pushed it open and saw that the guest room had its own ensuite bathroom. He set down his things and went next door to the walk-in closet. Though Caleb rarely stayed here, the closet was full of clothes. Most still had the tags on. A few that didn't were still perfectly pressed and new. Adrian chose a tagless white t-shirt and a pair of black lounge pants, found a pack of disposable underwear, and went back to his room. After his shower, Adrian changed into Caleb's clothes. They were several sizes too big, practically swallowing him. The t-shirt hung down to his mid-thigh, and he had to roll up the pant legs several times. The elastic waistband was so loose it threatened to slide off his hips. He had to pull the drawstring tight and tie it in a knot. As he was drying his hair, he heard a faint knock on the door. He turned off the hairdryer and opened the door. The knocking had stopped, but he heard Caleb's voice asking if he was done showering. The first thing he saw wasn't Caleb, but the ridiculously large stag lantern. Adrian's eyelashes were still damp. He blinked, a little stunned, and asked if the lantern was for him. At the same time, on the other side of the lantern, Caleb was looking at Adrian. Fresh from the shower, Adrian's skin was flushed from the heat. His dark hair was still damp and slightly messy, with a few strands clinging to his temples. The oversized t-shirt hung loosely on his frame, revealing the sharp line of his collarbone, which was slightly red from being scrubbed. He had rolled up the pant legs, exposing slender, almost fragile-looking ankles. Caleb's throat tightened. He held out the stag lantern, his gaze shifting away from Adrian. He said of course it was. Buying a lantern for himself would be incredibly dull. Gifts were more fun when exchanged. Daylight, seeing the large object, bounded out of the room and looked up at it curiously. Adrian took the lantern. His dark eyes, still soft from the warm water, were like freshly bloomed ink, dark yet clear. He said he would remember. Caleb, still flustered, asked what he meant. Adrian explained he would remember to give Caleb an interesting gift in return for the holidays. He then asked if there was anything else, as he needed to finish drying his hair. Caleb said there wasn't. "Good night," Adrian said, and closed the door. Caleb stared at the closed door for a long moment before turning and striding back to his own room. Adrian finished drying his hair, took his medication, and then picked up his phone. He logged into his email. His inbox had exploded with messages from Ethan. "Where are you? Let's meet. You're so good with a camera. Why are you so quiet now? Oh, right. Photography doesn't require conversation. Take your time replying. I have patience. Let me guess, are you working alone or with a group? Or is someone putting you up to this? What did they promise you? Money? Fame? Are you downstairs right now?" New emails were still pouring in. Ethan was losing his composure. The latest one simply read, "Who the hell are you?" Adrian replied with the same 2 words as before, "You guess." After sending the message, Adrian logged into a different email account and sent a new message. "I have even more explosive material on Ethan Pierce. The price is in the 7 figures. If you're serious, contact me. The offer expires at 6 a.m. tomorrow, at which point I will contact other interested parties." Ethan was currently the biggest star in the country. There were plenty of rivals who were envious and would love to see him fall. Adrian's chosen target wasn't one of Ethan's direct competitors. Those stars were already famous and had powerful connections. Bringing Ethan down offered them little benefit and risked angering Ethan's agency. Contacting them might even result in them using the information to curry favor with Ethan, allowing him and his company to preemptively shut down media channels. Instead, he contacted a male celebrity of a similar type to Ethan. His agency was a direct rival of Ethan's, and while he had some fame and a fan base, he was always just short of breaking through to the next level. Taking Ethan down could be the break he needed. This type of person, even if initially hesitant, would find the temptation too great to resist. And even if they ultimately didn't go through with it, they wouldn't warn Ethan, hoping someone else would take the bait and get Ethan out of the picture. His last task for the day complete, Adrian put his phone down and went to bed. The bedding was fresh. Adrian pulled back the covers, then glanced at the stag lantern hanging by the window. The second floor also had panoramic windows, and the lantern, set against the backdrop of the forest, looked almost like a real mythical creature poised to take flight. Adrian watched it for a while, then got back into bed. He turned off the lights, plunging the room into darkness. Moonlight streamed in, and as his eyes adjusted, he got up and walked to the lantern. He pressed the power switch. The lantern lit up, illuminating half the room. Golden red light shone through its soaring antlers, every detail seeming to come to life. The lantern's glow was reflected in Adrian's eyes, making his dark pupils seem as if they were dusted with gold. Meanwhile, Caleb walked out of his bathroom with a towel wrapped around his waist. He hadn't dried his hair, and water dripped from the wet strands down his neck and over his bare torso, tracing the lines of his abs. He sat down on the sofa and saw the bag of gummy candies sparkling on the table. A familiar heat stirred in his lower abdomen. He grabbed the bag, tore it open roughly, and took out an orange-shaped gummy. He unwrapped the final layer of plastic, squeezed the candy. It was soft and chewy, but not nearly as soft as Adrian's earlobe, and tossed it into his mouth. He lay back on the sofa, staring at the ceiling. The restless energy that coursed through him didn't subside until the first hint of dawn appeared outside his window. Adrian woke up at 8. For the first time in a long while, he had slept without dreaming. The first thing he saw upon opening his eyes was the stag lantern by the window, its light faint after being on all night. Then he saw the vast expanse of trees outside, the morning sun making the leaves look as if they had been washed clean, a deep, soothing green. Adrian got out of bed, turned off the lantern, and stood looking at the view for a long moment before reaching for his phone. The rival celebrity had sent several emails, the first at 3 in the morning. Adrian opened the most recent one. "I'll buy it. How do we do this?" Adrian replied with 4 words, "Wait for my instructions," and went to get ready for the day. He came out of the bathroom still wearing Caleb's clothes and went downstairs. The aroma of food greeted him as he reached the ground floor. Caleb was already up. Adrian walked to the kitchen. The top half of the kitchen window was a large, sliding glass panel, which was open to another view of the lush, green forest. Caleb stood with his back to the door, making a savory frittata. Adrian didn't go in, just stood in the doorway. Caleb soon noticed him but didn't turn around. He asked if Adrian was hungry, saying breakfast was almost ready. Before Caleb asked, Adrian hadn't felt hungry. He rarely ate breakfast anyway. But now that he mentioned it, Adrian realized he was starving. He said he wanted a large portion. Caleb didn't reply, just freed a hand to give him a thumbs up. Adrian went to the dining room. He saw now that the dining table was a single, massive slab of solid wood, at least 4 inches thick. It was simply polished, showcasing the beautiful, intricate grain of the wood. Trees were one of Adrian's few passions, which was one of the reasons he had agreed to the wilderness expiation 10 years ago. Later, in that forest, he had survived in part because of the nourishment the trees provided, giving them an even deeper meaning for him. He ran his fingertips over the table's surface, feeling the warmth of the wood. After a moment, he went to the fruit bowl, selected an apple, and began to peel it meticulously. By the time Caleb brought 2 large plates of frittata to the table, 2 perfectly peeled apples and a pitcher of fruit-infused water were also set out. Caleb put down the plates. Adrian finally saw his pale face and the dark circles under his eyes. He paused, asking if Caleb hadn't slept well. Caleb, not meeting his eyes, replied with a low voice that it wasn't that he hadn't slept well. He hadn't slept at all. Adrian was about to speak when his phone, sitting on the table, vibrated. The screen lit up with Mason Grant's name. Caleb could see the caller ID as well. Adrian put down his fork, the tines clinking softly against the plate. He said he needed to take this. He answered, and Mason spoke first, saying he needed to consult with him and asking when he was free. Adrian replied that he was free after 11. Mason confirmed a meeting at 12 and gave him an address. Just then, another call came through. It was Richard Sterling. For the past few days, Richard had been calling Adrian like clockwork, his conversations a mix of apologies and attempts to persuade him to move back to the Sterling estate. Today, however, it was about something else. He announced that the company's new hotel on Nantucket was opening, with a grand opening gala next Friday. He said many influential people would be there, and it would be a good networking opportunity for Adrian. He told him to clear his schedule and be ready to leave at 2 p.m. on Friday. Richard had never wanted Adrian in the public eye before. This invitation was clearly an attempt to curry favor. Adrian hung up. He didn't ask Caleb if he was also going to Nantucket, nor did he ask about his insomnia. He just quietly ate his breakfast. The only sounds in the dining room were the occasional clicks of silverware. After they finished, Caleb finally spoke. He said that if Adrian didn't want to go back, he could stay here. He added that he would be living here from now on as well and would have someone move his things over in the afternoon, asking if Adrian needed anything brought over. Adrian didn't have much, just the one suitcase he'd brought back from abroad, and his clothes were still at the hotel. But there was one thing he'd left behind. He said he needed his puzzle. After Dylan's death, it didn't matter whether he stayed at the Sterling estate or not. A hotel was fine, but daylight was another matter. He would either have to find a dog-friendly apartment or board her. Adrian would never board her unless it was an absolute emergency. Caleb had known from the start that Adrian wouldn't refuse. After putting the dishes in the dishwasher, while Adrian was upstairs changing, Caleb vigorously ruffled Daylight's fur. He promised her he'd bring back some A5 Wagyu beef for dinner. Daylight, who had clearly had Wagyu before, seemed to understand and happily nudged Caleb's hand with her head. A few minutes later, Adrian came downstairs. Caleb had left enough food and water for Daylight. In the car, as he buckled his seatbelt, he asked Adrian where he was going, offering to drop him off before heading to the office. Adrian took out his phone, found the address of his meeting with Mason, and searched for a nearby tea house with private rooms. A few seconds later, he gave Caleb the name of the place. Caleb dropped Adrian off at the tea house. He didn't ask what the meeting was about, only if Adrian would be home for dinner. Adrian thought for a moment and said yes. A smile touched Caleb's lips. He raised his left hand and waved. "See you at home." Adrian got out of the car. He went inside and booked a private room. Once the server had brought the tea and left, Adrian logged into his email. The celebrity he had contacted sent a new message. "Did you change your mind?" Adrian raised the stakes. He wrote back that the information he had was enough to completely ruin Ethan Pierce, and he wanted to see a demonstration of good faith first. The celebrity was clearly waiting by his inbox, replying almost instantly that money wasn't an issue, but he needed some proof that the information was legitimate. Adrian gave him no room to negotiate. He stated that the other party had no choice. He could sell this information to many people, but they had only him to trust. This time, it took a while for a reply to come. The celebrity finally wrote back, asking for his account number and saying he could transfer a 10% deposit. Adrian didn't even blink. He demanded 50%, $4.5 million. The other party replied that he had better not be scamming him, because that amount was enough to press federal charges, and told him to send the account information. Adrian provided an offshore account number as a precaution. If the celebrity took the information and tried to trade it to Ethan for favors, any investigation into the account would trace back to Havenwood. A few minutes later, he received a bank notification on his phone. The money had arrived. Adrian typed a message in the email. On the afternoon of July 30th, Ethan Pierce visited the Hang Sun Apartments. A photo of him entering the building can be found online. That same night, there was a suicide at the Hang Sun Apartments. He left it at that and hit send. Ethan had connections to Dylan's foundation, a fact the celebrity could easily verify with a few inquiries within the industry. How the celebrity chose to use this information to take down Ethan was of no concern to Adrian. His only goal was to systematically back Ethan into a corner. After he sent the email, the celebrity didn't reply. Half an hour later, Adrian received another bank notification. The remaining $4.5 million had been transferred. Adrian put his phone down and poured himself a cup of tea, its earthy aroma filling the small room. At the Sterling Corporation's branch office, Caleb stepped out of the elevator. His secretary hurried over, informing him that Mr. Cole was waiting for him in his office. Caleb gave the secretary, a longtime employee from before his arrival, a cool glance. He said nothing as he walked past her desk, but his voice was flat as he told her that he expected to see her resignation letter on his desk by 10 the next morning. The secretary's face paled. She asked in a quavering voice if he was firing her. Caleb offered a chilling smile, his dark eyes unreadable. He clarified that it wasn't a firing, as she wasn't entitled to a severance package. If she resigned voluntarily, however, she might still be able to find some work to support that gossiping mouth of hers. The secretary broke into a cold sweat, watching in stunned silence as Caleb entered his office and the heavy door closed behind him. Caleb knew. He had known all along that she had been taking money from Ryan. Trembling, she went to type her resignation. Inside the office, Ryan Cole stood up from the sofa with a broad smile. He asked why Caleb hadn't let him know he was back. Caleb replied nonchalantly that he hadn't needed to. Ryan had a nose for this sort of thing and always showed up uninvited. Ryan's smile didn't falter. He said he was just in time, as he had something to discuss, and handed Caleb a folder. It was the proposed guest list for the Nantucket Hotel opening. Caleb flipped through it. On the first page, he saw several familiar names. Dr. Evan Holt, Mason Grant, Ethan Pierce, and Jonathan Vance, the university president, Julian Vance's adoptive father. Ryan watched Caleb's expression, but saw none of the reaction he was hoping for. Disappointed, he said that as far as he knew, Dr. Holt and Adrian had known each other abroad, and their relationship was quite complicated. Caleb's tone was still languid. Is that so? He tossed the list on his desk, sank into his plush leather chair, and closed his eyes as if he were about to fall asleep. Ryan was baffled. Had he been wrong? Was Caleb's interest in Adrian just platonic? Losing interest, he picked up the list and said that if Caleb had no objections, he would send it to the PR department. Caleb rubbed his thumb against his index finger. After Ryan left, he called Alex and asked for an update on his last request. Alex replied that he was just about to call, explaining that the Hang Sun Apartments was formerly the Jewel Hotel. 20 years ago, the original owners went bankrupt and the property was sold to the Grant Corporation, who then sold it to the current real estate company. He added that he had obtained the elevator surveillance footage from July 30th and asked if Caleb wanted him to send it over. Caleb straightened up in his chair and opened his laptop. "Send it." At precisely 12 o'clock, Adrian walked into the restaurant where he was meeting Mason. A waiter was waiting at the entrance and led him directly to a table. The restaurant was completely empty. Mason had booked the entire place. Mason had arrived early. He watched Adrian approach, his tongue gently probing the inside of his cheek where Julian had hit him. It still ached. He narrowed his eyes, his gaze fixed on Adrian until he sat down opposite him. Before seeing Adrian, he had thought his feelings were just a lingering attachment to Leo. But now, seeing him in person, he was certain. He had loved Leo, but he had also truly fallen in love with Adrian. They had similar faces but were two completely different people. He had fallen in love with this man who fascinated him to his very core. Mason let out a low laugh and tossed a menu across the table, telling him to order. Adrian chose a few simple, non-spicy dishes. Mason asked pointedly why he wasn't ordering any of the spicy dishes, which were the restaurant's specialty. Adrian was unmoved, stating that he never ate spicy food. Mason's words were laden with insinuation as he suggested that Adrian might try it and find himself unable to live without it. Adrian replied coolly that his doctor wouldn't allow him to try. Mason froze. What does that mean? But Adrian didn't elaborate, instead steering the conversation to business, asking what legal matter Mr. Grant wished to consult him about. Mason knew from their previous interactions that Adrian would never answer a question he didn't want to. He let it go for now, his tongue pressing against the inside of his mouth. He said that someone had assaulted him, and he wanted to know if he could press charges that would land them in jail. Adrian calmly asked if he had filed an injury report. Mason replied that he hadn't, as the damage was primarily psychological, and pressed his thumb hard against the corner of his mouth. A waiter arrived with their food, interrupting them. Once the waiter had left, Mason looked deeply at Adrian, a playful smile on his face. He said the assailant was a psychiatrist and asked if that didn't count as a professional breaking the law. Adrian's expression remained neutral. Doesn't. Mason suddenly shifted his posture, leaning forward with his elbows on the table, bringing him closer to Adrian. He asked for some professional advice on what legal means he could use to destroy the man. Adrian didn't even blink. He apologized, stating that he was only a legal consultant and that other matters were outside his scope of work. Mason laughed, picked up his chopsticks, and placed a piece of steamed lily bulb on Adrian's plate. He told him not to talk about unpleasant things and to eat, commenting that the lily bulb was very sweet. At the same time, Julian Vance's clinic had visitors. The receptionist brought 2 cups of coffee, stealing a glance at Jonathan and Miranda Vance before leaving the room and closing the door. Jonathan picked up his coffee, his eyes darting from his wife to Julian, who sat opposite them. Miranda took the cue and began, her voice sharp. She told Julian to stop this foolishness and come home, that this place wasn't suitable for him. She reminded him that he was their only son and they would never harm him, but that being with a man would do nothing for his future. She informed him that there was a gala next Friday to which they and the Holt family had been invited, and that he would be attending, as it was his chance to win back the Holt family's younger daughter. At that moment, Julian's mind drifted. He was thinking of Adrian. It had been almost a month since he had last seen him. Jonathan waited for a reply, and when none came, he slammed his coffee cup down. Julian snapped back to the present. He concealed his emotions and said calmly that he wouldn't go, that he would only ever have one partner, and that partner would be a man. Preposterous. Jonathan started to rise, but Miranda held him back. She frowned. "Are you really prepared to abandon your father and me?" Julian's face went pale. He cherished his parents more than anything. He had always strived to be their pride and joy, terrified of disappointing them. He had even lost Leo because of it. This time he didn't want to, he couldn't lose Adrian. He clenched his fists. "I love him. That has nothing to do with you or father." Shameless. Jonathan was shaking with rage. "He's a man, you're a man. Being together is a disgrace. My son cannot have a single flaw. You have one choice now, go to the gala or don't." To go meant giving up Adrian and returning to the path his father had laid out for him. Julian's nails dug into his palms. He lowered his head. "I'm sorry." Miranda was stunned by his resolve. She was about to speak when Jonathan suddenly grew calm. In a chillingly quiet voice, he said, "Sorry for what? For Gannett's Peak?" The name hung in the air, and the room fell into a terrifying silence. Miranda looked as if she had been struck. Her lips pressed into a thin, white line. Julian stopped breathing. His nails pierced the flesh of his palms, his heart seized by an icy grip. Just then, rain began to spatter against the window pane. The clear glass suddenly streaked with what looked like tears. A storm had arrived. 10 years ago, 2 weeks after he returned from the wilderness, the rain had been just as heavy. His dreams were a relentless loop of Leo being pushed off the cliff by Dylan. If he had just taken one step forward or shouted, he could have saved him. But he had done nothing. He had just watched as that slender figure vanished over the edge without a sound. Waking from the nightmare, gasping for breath, Julian had seen the weeping faces in the rain on his window and thrown back the covers. He was terrified. He had to go back to Gannett's Peak. Maybe Leo had survived. Maybe there was still a chance to make things right. He showered quickly, threw on some clothes, and grabbed his phone and ID. But when he opened the door, Miranda was standing there, her hair neat, as if she had been waiting for a long time. She took in his clothes, her brow furrowing slightly. Ever since Leo's suicide, she had felt Julian's behavior was strange. Not like someone grieving a friend, but like someone who was afraid. Her expression grew grave. She told him to follow her to the study. In the study, under the weight of her questioning, Julian broke down and confessed everything that had happened on the mountain. Miranda was horrified to learn that Leo had been pushed. She trembled, realizing that Julian had helped cover it up and forge a suicide note, which was a crime. She reached for her phone, insisting they had to call the police immediately to get a lighter sentence. But Jonathan stopped them. "No police." He entered the study, his face ashen. He demanded to know how he could remain in the world of academia if it got out that he had raised a murderer, and declared that he would not allow the family's century-old reputation to be tarnished. Julian stood frozen, his face drained of color. Miranda protested, but Jonathan cut her off, his voice ironclad. He stated that Julian hadn't pushed him, hadn't done anything, and knew nothing. The only thing to do now was to make this go away as quickly as possible, to erase every trace of that boy's existence. A clap of thunder pulled Julian from his memory. He met his father's gaze, his voice hoarse. "You win." He turned to the window, where the weeping faces in the glass had morphed into his own. He whispered, "I'll go." The rain intensified. Adrian checked out of his hotel and stepped outside with his suitcase. It was only just after 5, but the sky was already dark. A valet brought his car around, offering to take his luggage and suggesting he wait for the heavy rain to subside. Adrian smiled faintly, saying the forecast called for heavy rain all night, so it was better to leave now. He tipped the valet and got into the driver's seat. The roads were sparse with traffic. As he left the city limits, Caleb called, asking if he was on his way back. Adrian, glancing at the map, said he was about an hour away. Caleb told him the ribs he was cooking still needed 2 more hours and to drive safely in the rain. Adrian hung up. He made good time and arrived at the hillside villa 15 minutes ahead of schedule. The driveway was well lit, the lights piercing through the downpour. Caleb's new SUV, now clean, was parked in the 2-car garage. Adrian parked next to it and knocked on the door. Caleb opened it, wearing a black apron with a large dog printed on it, a freebie from their supermarket trip. He raised an eyebrow in surprise, commenting on his early arrival. Adrian blamed the inaccurate GPS. As he moved to enter, Caleb blocked his way, unlocked the door with his fingerprint, and then asked for one of Adrian's hands to register his print. After a moment of hesitation, Adrian extended his left index finger. Once his print was registered, Caleb turned back to the kitchen, saying Adrian's puzzle was outside his room and the ribs needed more time, so he could shower first. Adrian took his suitcase upstairs. The puzzle was on a wooden stand just outside the guest room, exactly as he had left it at the Sterling estate, even covered with the same dust cloth. He moved the puzzle into the room first, then brought in his suitcase. He noticed the guest room closet had glass doors, putting its contents on full display. He hung up his clothes and took a set of cotton loungewear into the bathroom. By the time he was done showering, it was completely dark outside. He could hear the rain drumming against the trees. He loved the sound of rain. He stood by the window for a while, towel drying his hair, before heading downstairs. The ground floor was filled with the savory aroma of ribs. Daylight, having eaten, brought a small soccer ball to Adrian, a new toy from Caleb. He played with her for a bit until Caleb came out with a pot of kimchi pork ribs, a plate of sautéed greens, and a dish of fried eel bones. They ate in the living room again, the local news playing in the background. The news mentioned several celebrity events but made no mention of Ethan. They ate and talked, and Caleb recommended the fried eel bones. He then asked what time Adrian was leaving for Nantucket on Friday. Adrian, who had never tried eel bones before, found them surprisingly crispy and flavorful, like eating peanuts. He said his flight was at 2 and asked about Caleb's plans. Caleb mentioned he had some business to attend to and would probably arrive around 8 that evening. After dinner, Adrian went upstairs. He looked up the journalist whose name he had heard on the news and learned he had resigned from his previous job a month ago without disclosing his new position. Adrian was puzzled. If this was the same man, how had he been reinstated as a journalist and found a job at a TV station so quickly? He felt something was off. He had wanted to help the man get his press credentials back but lacked the connections in the country. If this was indeed him, Adrian needed to find out who was backing him. He then browsed the day's headlines. There was no news connecting Ethan to Dylan's suicide. The stories about the birthday concert incident had also been swiftly managed by PR, with only a few online forums still discussing the ensign's suicide note. The rival celebrity had either failed or had used the information to cut a deal with Ethan. Adrian wasn't disappointed. He had been planning this for 10 years. A small setback wouldn't derail his plans. A faint metallic taste rose in his throat. He pressed a handkerchief to his lips and coughed quietly. The coughing lasted longer this time. When he pulled the handkerchief away, the bloodstains seemed darker. He knew he didn't have much time left. He had to speed things up. He opened a drawer. Inside lay the child's safety wrist strap Caleb had bought at the street festival. His finger traced the coiled plastic cord just as a knock came from the door. "Are you asleep?" It was Caleb. Adrian's finger stilled. He stared at the door but didn't answer. After a moment, Caleb left. For the next few days, though they lived under the same roof, they barely saw each other. No matter how early Caleb got up, Adrian was already gone. No matter how early he came home, Adrian was already in his room. Soon it was Friday. At 1:30 p.m., Caleb called Adrian, who had just boarded the private jet. On the plane were not only Richard Sterling but also Mason Grant and his father. The two older men were chatting, leaving an empty seat next to Mason. Mason spotted Adrian and greeted him warmly. Richard and his father both looked over, and the older Grant complimented Adrian on his presence, saying he outshone his own son. Richard laughed it off, praising Mason's business acumen. Amidst the pleasantries, Adrian greeted them and then calmly took the seat next to Mason. As Mason leaned in to talk, Adrian pulled a copy of The Little Prince from his briefcase and began to read. The sight of the book made Mason's eye twitch. He remembered Ethan once asking him to find a first-ion copy to give to Julian as a birthday gift. Mason had always known Leo loved that book. He had kept a copy with a beautiful cover hidden away in a drawer. It had only occurred to him later that it must have been a gift from Julian. Consumed by jealousy, he had bought a copy and read it overnight. After Leo's death, he bought the entire village where Leo had lived, and one by one, he tore out the pages of that copy of The Little Prince and burned them. Now, seeing the book in Adrian's hands, Mason's anger flared. He asked if the book was any good. Adrian knew Mason had assumed it was a gift from Julian. He remembered Mason once telling him, for no apparent reason, that The Little Prince was the story he hated most in the world. "It's good," Adrian said, turning a page. Mason's good mood evaporated. He loosened his tie and repeated the same words from 10 years ago, calling the story sentimental trash. Adrian didn't react. When the plane landed, he was the first to disembark. Mason hurried after him. As they walked down the jet bridge, a man emerged from a nearby restroom. It was Julian. He saw Adrian and wasn't surprised. He knew this was a Sterling-owned hotel. But seeing Mason with him, his expression darkened. Mason also saw Julian and, with a dangerous glint in his eye, grabbed Adrian's arm, turning him to face him. He suggested they explore the island together. Adrian had already seen Julian. He understood immediately. Jonathan Vance had many powerful former students. An invitation to a Sterling event was normal. Julian's presence meant he had once again capitulated to his father. Just then, he heard the distant screams of fans. "Ethan, we love you." Ethan was here too. Adrian's mind raced. Mason's grip was tight, but Adrian didn't struggle. He simply looked at Mason and said coolly that he was not comfortable with his style of social interaction and asked him to let go. Mason's heart hammered in his chest. He deliberately leaned in close, his voice low. "I really don't know what to do with you," he murmured, and released him. From Julian's perspective, the two looked incredibly intimate. He had never intended to give up on Adrian, but seeing him with Mason, he started to walk toward them, only to be stopped by his mother emerging from the restroom. His father was also nearby. Weighing his options, Julian gave Adrian one last, long look, then turned and walked away. Mason, seeing Julian leave, stepped back with a smile, offering to be Adrian's free tour guide. A past comment from someone flashed in Adrian's mind that Caleb had been everywhere and was the best free tour guide. He replied that he already had the best guide and didn't need Mason's help. Suspecting he meant Julian, Mason stuck close to Adrian all the way to the hotel. Adrian's room was 2021. Mason had been moved to 2022, right next door. As Adrian got out of the elevator, he saw someone sitting on a suitcase in front of room 2023, across the hall. It was Ethan. He looked up, took off his sunglasses, and smiled. "Mr. Hayes, we meet again." He then glanced at Mason, who was right behind Adrian, and asked if he was a friend. Mason, seeing Ethan, frowned slightly but said nothing. He told Adrian he was going to his room and walked off down the other end of the hall. Left alone with Ethan, Adrian didn't answer his question. He simply nodded and moved to open his own door. Ethan spoke again from behind him, explaining that his room had been compromised by stalkers and that Ryan had kindly swapped with him. He was just waiting for him to bring up the key card. Adrian said coolly that he didn't need an explanation. Ethan smiled. "Oh, but I do. You're Caleb's respected older cousin. I wouldn't want him to hear any strange rumors and misunderstand me." Ethan stared at Adrian's back. Last week, he had received a call from his boss about the Hang Sun Apartments incident. He had been warned that someone was trying to take him down. His boss had managed to kill the story with a rival or in exchange for a movie role. Ethan had immediately asked who it was, his mind racing. The culprit had a tail. But when his boss revealed the name, it was a crushing disappointment. He knew the celebrity. He couldn't believe someone so insignificant was the cause of his public humiliation. He met with the man and easily extracted the truth. He gave him a small bribe, and the man eagerly handed over the anonymous sender's account number. Ethan had it traced. Just before boarding the plane, he got the results. Havenwood, the town where Warren Pierce was living out his retirement. Burdens were always burdens. Why couldn't Warren have just died in prison? This Adrian in front of him was just as much of a burden, with a face so similar to Leo's and a relationship with his Caleb that was far too close. That villa of Caleb's was tainted now. He and Caleb would have to find a new love nest. Ethan's tongue traced the inside of his mouth where he had bitten it raw. He dropped the pretense and said slowly, "Mr. Hayes, let me tell you a secret. I have a bad habit. When I want something, I have to have it. And if anyone tries to take it from me," he enunciated each word clearly, "I will crush them without hesitation." Adrian's expression didn't change. The door beeped open. His voice was calm. "Let me tell you a secret, too." Ryan Cole was looking in the wrong place. He shouldn't have been investigating who my biological mother was, but rather, his speech was deliberate. My biological father. Adrian stepped into his room, ignoring the look of utter shock and horror on the face behind him, and closed the door. At 7, Adrian went down to the ballroom, where the cocktail party was already underway. Ethan was chatting with friends, but his eyes followed Adrian's every move, his fingers tightening around the stem of his wine glass. Adrian's words from 2 hours ago still had his heart pounding. Was Adrian bluffing, or was it the truth? Richard and the older men were in a different ballroom. Adrian wasn't worried about Ethan revealing anything. Right now, Ethan was the one who most desperately needed him to be Richard Sterling's nephew. The dinner was a seafood buffet. Adrian's stomach was unsettled, but he needed to eat something. He went to the dessert table and took a slice of Black Forest cake. As he found an empty table, Mason joined him, complaining that it was stuffy and suggesting they go out to the terrace. Just then, Evan Holt also came over and sat down, asking Adrian what time he had arrived. Learning that they knew each other, Mason's expression cooled. The two men sized each other up, exchanging a tense handshake. Adrian ignored them, finished his cake, and went to find some hot water. As he approached a server, a cup was held out to him. "Long time no see, Adrian." It was Julian. He had been watching Adrian and had finally found an excuse to approach him. Adrian didn't take the cup, his gaze dismissive. He said they weren't that close. As he turned to leave, Julian's expression shifted, and he blocked his path, thinking it must have been because of the airport encounter. He began to explain, but Adrian cut him off, his voice low and laced with sarcasm. I get it. Who would want to be friends with someone who's mentally unstable? It was just a job. My mistake. Julian's face went pale. Before he could respond, Adrian had walked over to a server and requested a cup of warm water. From a distance, Ethan watched the scene unfold, his expression growing more complex. Adrian also knew Julian. It was like 10 years ago all over again, with Adrian in Leo's place, connecting them all. The only difference was Caleb. At the thought of Caleb, Ethan's gaze turned icy. He got a glass of red wine and walked over to Adrian, suggesting they go somewhere to talk. Adrian finished his water. It was 7:20. Caleb still hadn't arrived. He set his cup down, took the wine from Ethan, and followed him out of the ballroom, leaving the untouched glass on a table by the door. Ethan led him outside. As he was about to call for a car, a Bentley pulled up. The driver got out, handed Adrian the keys, and walked away. Adrian turned to Ethan. You drive or I drive? Ethan clenched his fist, hating Adrian's effortless confidence. Who the hell did he think he was? Just some bastard from nowhere, yet he shone like the sun. Vermin should know their place, hiding in the gutter. He snatched the keys. I'll drive. Adrian got into the passenger seat without a word. Ethan slammed on the gas and sped onto the coastal highway. At the same time, an identical Bentley pulled up to the hotel entrance. The hotel manager rushed out, greeting Caleb profusely and apologizing for not knowing his flight had arrived early. Caleb got out of the car, his eyes fixed on the distant taillights. He hadn't been mistaken. That was Adrian. He told his driver to get out, threw his jacket in the back seat, and got behind the wheel, speeding off in the same direction. It was almost 8, and the coastal highway was nearly empty. Ethan turned onto a quieter, more secluded road that led to an undeveloped wild beach he knew from previous photo shoots. He drove from memory, his eyes constantly flicking to Adrian in the rearview mirror. As the intermittent streetlights illuminated Adrian's face, so much like Leo's, Ethan suddenly told him to put on some music. Adrian opened the media player, his voice as neutral as his expression, and asked what he wanted to hear. Ethan, watching him closely, said 3 words: "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." As the familiar, gentle melody filled the car, Ethan was disappointed. Adrian showed no reaction to the song. If his mother was Evelyn Hayes, he couldn't possibly be Leo. Yet, seeing Adrian's complete lack of response, Ethan felt a strange sense of melancholy. He found himself thinking, if Leo were still alive, would he be like Adrian? No, Leo had adored him. At the orphanage, Leo would always save his hard-boiled egg for him. Leo had lied, saying he didn't like eggs, because he knew Ethan wanted one every day. Ethan had lied too. He hated the taste of eggs, but he loved that Leo saved them for him. Leo had been so good to him. He would never be like Adrian, who not only tried to steal his Caleb but was also so cold to him. Stop the car. The sharp command snapped Ethan out of his reverie. His heart leaped into his throat and he slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched as the car swerved sideways, stopping just inches from the guardrail. Ethan's chest hit the steering wheel. The music died. He whipped his head around. Adrian was sitting calmly in the passenger seat, a stark contrast to his own disheveled state. It was a familiar feeling, the one he always had with Leo. No matter how polished his exterior, he was just a pathetic clown underneath. A surge of hatred rose in him. He stared at Adrian and broke into a brilliant smile. Are you afraid to die? Finally, they were getting to it. Adrian looked straight ahead. What are you trying to do? I kind of like you, Ethan said, his smile widening. Seriously. The first time I saw you, it was like seeing my brother again. But I know you're not him. You hate me, Ethan continued, leaning closer. Why? So many people love me, everyone loves me, but you hate me. People try so hard to get close to me, and I ignore them. I offer to make you my lawyer, and you refuse. Why? Is it because you're in love with my Caleb? He moved even closer, his lips almost touching Adrian's ear, and whispered, "You shouldn't have yelled stop just now. If we had died together, the world would be a much quieter place." Suddenly, Adrian unbuckled his seatbelt and got out of the car. Before Ethan could react, Adrian had rounded the front of the car and opened the driver's side door. "You passenger seat." Ethan stared at him, then burst out laughing. "You really are a coward, aren't you? So afraid of death. Actually, dying." Adrian grabbed Ethan's arm and dragged him out of the car. His grip was like steel. He shoved Ethan into the passenger seat. By the time Ethan realized what was happening and reached for the door handle, the locks clicked shut. He turned and stared at Adrian. "What are you doing?" Adrian started the car, expertly reversed and straightened it out. His gaze was fixed on the darkness ahead. "Fulfilling your wish." The car shot forward like an arrow. Unbuckled, Ethan was thrown forward, his head hitting the windshield. His wish? If we had died together, the world would be a much quieter place. Caleb had parked behind a large cluster of agave plants. He watched as Adrian pulled Ethan from the driver's seat. Only then did he realize who was with him. A wave of anxiety washed over him. Just as Adrian sped off, he started his own car and dialed Adrian's number, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Adrian, pick up the damn phone." The phone vibrated in Adrian's pocket, but he seemed not to notice, driving off the road and onto the wild beach. Ethan's heart was pounding. He gripped the seat, his body thrown around by the bumpy ride. He felt a wave of nausea but held it back, his eyes glued to Adrian. He wasn't afraid of death, and he didn't believe for a second that Adrian was either. Adrian would break. He had to. The sound of the waves grew louder. Adrian didn't slow down, he accelerated. The wheels spun on the sand. Ahead was the ocean, a vast expanse of darkness. Just as the car was about to plunge into the water, a terrified scream ripped through the air. "Stop!" Caleb's heart stopped. He was about to get out of his car when the other car's door opened. Adrian stepped out, his foot sinking into the ankle-deep water. He glanced back at Ethan, whose face was ashen. He said nothing, but for the first time, his dark eyes showed a clear emotion. Scorn. He knew Ethan would break. Ethan was a master of disguise, perhaps even fooling himself. But in a life-or-death moment, his innate cowardice would always surface. Adrian waded through the shallow water and onto the sand. He didn't look back. He found a small path and followed it back to the road. His shoes and pant legs were soaked and heavy with sand. He took off his shoes and socks and walked slowly along the pavement. His chest heaved. The high-speed drive had strained his heart. When it had calmed somewhat, he took out his phone. The screen showed a missed call from Caleb. He slowed for a fraction of a second, then resumed his pace. He was about to put the phone away when it vibrated again. It was Caleb. The screen's glow illuminated the weariness in Adrian's eyes. A soft sigh escaped into the salty air. At the last second, Adrian answered the call. "Are you at the hotel?" Adrian asked first. Through the phone, he could hear the sound of waves. Caleb's voice was low. "I am." Caleb was following him from a distance, watching that lonely figure walking along the dark road.